I'm Georgia Weber, podcaster of Drawing Health, and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Georgia Weber about her podcast, Drawing Health. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button, so be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Based in Newfoundland and Labrador, Georgia Weber is a comics artist and teacher, exploring comics from a health-centered perspective under the name Drawing the Inside Out. She's the author of Dumb, Living Without a Voice, and co-author of Vivian Chong's memoir, Dancing After 10. Her short comics have been published in The Believer, Taddle Creek, and Irene, among others. She co-founded the Downtown Comics Book Club and Kids Love Comics, a children's-focused comics project with Kerri Claire Neil, owner of Downtown Comics. She's a comics mentor through the Sequential Artists Workshop, where she's the artist-in-residence for the graphic novel intensive program in 2025. Her current comic in progress is a great departure from her graphic medicine work. Dark Hole is an epic work of fiction, blending horror, erotica, and philosophy. Drawing Health is a podcast about the intersection of comics and health, also called graphic medicine. Through community interviews and guided audio practices, the podcast explored the worlds within ourselves and without, nurturing creative practice, inspiration, and personal health journey. The motto of the podcast is, "Health and creativity are not at odds. They are two expressions of you." So without further ado, here's my chat with Georgia Weber about her podcast, Drawing Health. So Georgia Weber, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, I'm so happy to. Nice to meet you too, John.
Absolutely. This is great. Before I could go on with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because I think comics were an easy part of vacations and sometimes a treat at the drugstore early on. So probably if I was trying to be accurate, the first comic book I ever read was like an Archie comic. But if we think about the first comic that I ever really connected to, maybe bought and treasured, was definitely Calvin and Hobbes.
That's collections, a classic. Yeah.
Yeah, the collections were a companion to me all through high school, and definitely anytime I was struggling or needed a break, I would go to Calvin and Hobbes, and I still have those books and I still return to them. And I learned a lot about comics from Bill Watterson.
Yeah, it's classic. People still to this day refer to them, and I think they're timeless in the fact that there's no real technology. You think about it, and there's a lot of imagination, which is what artists need to create. So it's wonderful for sure. That's great stuff growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially because I feel the innate drive to create is just present at all times. And then when it comes to other artists who are inspiring me, I mean, I find anybody who is really pursuing their own art, their own style, their own voice to be really inspiring. I think that we all have such wide ranges of influence, and there's so much content out there. It's so easy to get wrapped up in comparison. It's easy to feel like you'll only be successful if you look like the things that are successful now. But whenever I come across a comic that is just a powerful individual voice, I feel so ignited to connect with that person. I mean, I know that I'm connecting to a person, which I think is really crucial in the age of AI art, that art is not just there to be pretty, but to actually connect us as human beings. And that means that I can be inspired by things from all different genres, all different styles. So I guess it's hard to describe who kind of catches me in that way. And I'm also extremely bad. I say this on, I think, every interview that I've ever done. I'm really bad with recall in the moment. So while I totally have a bunch of names and comics that I could give you maybe at a later date, when you ask the question is the time I will be least capable of answering.
Well, I understand. Putting you on the spot can be kind of tough for sure. But as you say, there's so many out there. And the beauty of it is there's someone new every day. That's
Oh
the
my
beauty of
goodness,
comics.
yeah.
It's tremendous. So, in addition to being a comic book creator, you're also the host of the Drawing Health podcast. Where you can talk a little bit about the podcast and maybe how it all started.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to talk about. I am a person who has hurt myself a lot through my process of making comics, through the different expectations I had and the pressure I put on myself, the timelines I gave myself, and really just pushing myself through when I needed to pause and not understanding what my limits were, and certainly not understanding myself and like what makes me feel good and why I'm doing this art. All of that contributed to me having not only a lot of physical pain, which many artists do, especially when people get like a few years into drawing on an almost daily basis, you start to notice complaints and parts of your body that are letting you know, like, too much, but you just can't stop drawing because you love what you're doing. So, not only physical pain, but also the emotional and mental relationship to my art became one that was fraught with fear of more pain, and also just the feeling of pressure that I'd given myself and pressure I felt from elsewhere really took the joy out of it. So I actually started teaching a class, which I still teach. It's weekly on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Zoom. And that class is called Drawing Health. It's a weekly hour for us to reform that relationship to our art through our bodies and to be really mindful that health is at the center of it. I've done a lot of training, I've experienced a lot, like as a client, going through different modes of trauma healing and physical healing and connection. I mean, you name it, I've tried it. Like, I've done a lot of these different methods for myself, trying to come back to that friendly relationship between my art, my health, whatever that creative spark is, and why I'm doing it. And all of that is a practice. So I started the class every week as a way to maintain the practice for myself and to connect with others. I find I'm very socially motivated. I really need a companion, a buddy, or just people to talk to about this work. I find there's a real gap in our comics world, but also maybe in the world at large, for people to talk about how health impacts creativity and how important creativity is to our health. So the class has been a stable part of my life for many years now, 5 or almost 6 years. But the podcast was a way to expand that so that people could actually benefit from the things that I guide in the class, because I do a lot of speaking people through like a guided meditation, a guided exploration, and I weave creative exercises in. So we're not separating, here's our time for focusing on our health and here's our time for focusing on creativity. They're coming side by side at the same time, woven together. And I wanted the podcast to be a place where people could have those practices, have my voice to accompany them, but at any time, regardless of whether they can make the class or whether they can pay for the class, just something that they can use and support themselves throughout their lives and in as much quantity or as little as they want. I love the idea of people connecting to a practice and then repeating that practice maybe for a couple days in a row or like a few times over the year, because anything that we do, it's new each time we do it. So the podcast has two components. One component is those practices. Those are the guided audio practices. And I follow a different theme for each one. That's also how I run the class. There's a theme each week, and we kind of focus around that. And then the other component, which is published in an alternating fashion to the practices, is interviews with other artists who are either making comics about health, so making what we call graphic medicine, or even just a comics artist I want to talk to ask, how do you take care of your health while you're doing this? Like, if you're making comics as part of your career, but the comics aren't about health, we still need to talk about how you're making this work and how you're making this good for you. So that's what the podcast is doing. And it comes out weekly. It's every Sunday at noon on Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, like I said, it alternates. So you have 1 week an interview, the next week a practice, going on and on. And I've planned them out for the year. So we're steady on the course.
Wow, that's tremendous. That is a great thing to do, especially after talking to so many creators. We've been through the pandemic. I think maybe that might have been a low point for a lot of people.
being isolated. You say we have to be connected, and a lot of people are stuck in their basements. And I think a lot of people sort of recognize gee whiz, it'd be better to do this in a better way. So with that in mind, I'm wondering, can you offer maybe just a few tips for creators based on your experience that they should keep in mind to maintain their health while trying to earn a living in this comic book business?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is talk to other creators about it, because exactly what you just mentioned, the connection and the need for these things to be a normalized part of our industry's health is so important. And I also think we've got, a long legacy of health matters being considered private and individual, which ultimately means that we don't benefit from each other's support, from each other's knowledge, from creating networks of care, because we actually can't deal with our health alone. It's not possible. And if you start looking into things like neurobiology, you understand very quickly that humans are wired for connection. So the idea that we would silo a part of ourselves, a really integral part, the part we often take for granted, that allows us to be present with each other, that allows us to create things, that allows us to feel like ourselves. Health is incredibly important, and creativity is incredibly important to our health. So talking to other people about what you're going through, whether it's, hey, I've got this pain in my arm and it's not going away, what do I do? Or asking people, how are you finding the balance? Like, how do you enjoy your creative practice and also make sure that it's not consuming your life? That's an easy one for art to do, especially when you love it. And it's so hard to make a living. So I think also speaking to each other about our finances is a huge, huge part of ensuring our health and longevity in comics, and making sure that the balance we're choosing is a conscious choice, not something we feel stuck or forced into, because those things also contribute to massive stress and pressure, which we know has really, really detrimental effects on health, especially when it's chronic. So yeah, my advice is talk to people, talk to other creators, talk to publishers, whoever it is. There are no rules about who you can talk to about how we maintain a really healthy relationship to art and healthy relationships to our bodies and each other. But use your discretion for who you trust. And the other thing I would say is we talk a lot about warming up in art. And I think in comics classes, you'll often hear like, warm up drawing, draw something loose, draw something that is like a throwaway and helps you just kind of find your groove and get into it. But where the phrase warming up comes from, I mean, it much more relates to warming up your body, like physically warming it. And I don't mean like grab a bunch of blankets. I mean, move your body, move the blood, get the warmth and the nutrients, the oxygen flowing. And that actually means your muscles are more prepared to go through a long period of work without, on the other end, being extremely sore and tired or gripping into patterns of tension. So, warming up and also regular breaks where you're continuing to move not just the parts of your body that are drawing, but actually your whole body. So, those are simple things. Connection is so crucial that I would actually advise people to start with talking, but also to remember that warming your body by moving in an aerobic way, like something rhythmic, can be very soothing, whether it's like dancing or just kind of jogging on the spot or jumping up and down. You need 3 minutes, 3 minutes of that kind of movement before your body is beginning to be ready for your muscles to be pliable and working, and for it to ease the whole process of both your muscular work and also how you recover.
Good advice for sure. Absolutely. Now, you touched upon one point there about financials, and we're so lucky in Canada to have a great health support system, healthcare system. But I'm refer quite frequently to the United States. They have something because their health system, support system isn't as great as ours. For a lot of the comic book creators who retire or age out, they don't have that support system. So there's something called the Hero Initiative where people can donate and support these people in their old age. Do you think that's something we need to have here in Canada for people who, need something to fall back on, in addition to the support we get from our health system?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you're talking to a person who the health system has failed dramatically over my lifetime. So it's also good to acknowledge, even though we have a health system that we don't have to pay out of pocket for right now, and that does give us a lot of freedom to get things checked out and be more proactive and less fearful about interacting with the healthcare system. It's far from perfect, and there are people in our political system today who are actively working to dismantle our single payer system. So basically, we have to fight for it if we want to keep it. That's a huge element. And certainly, if we lose the single payer system, if we end up having like a half private healthcare system, we actually are going to be in that same position where we're having to choose to pay for things. So the situation is only going to get worse for the people that you're asking about, especially as we age. For the idea of the Hero Initiative, that is beautiful. That is people recognizing a need and stepping up to fill it. And that's one of the ways that we can counteract being controlled by a very authoritarian system that in the States is unquestionably fascism at this point. And, we're not immune here in Canada. Like I said, we're starting to see people really actively accept that direction by doing things like dismantling our social systems. So helping each other, it's a very powerful act. I would love to see more help, so I'm never going to say let's not do that. However, I am really, really interested. I think actually this year, 2026, for me is kind of the beginning of comics advocacy work, because one of the reasons that older cartoonists don't have supports and don't have money to actively pursue the kinds of healthcare or even just daily care that you need as you age, like we will all be disabled sooner or later. One of the reasons that we need that support in old age, though, is that we're not being adequately compensated now. We're paying to play. Like, comics artists are paying for their own work to be produced by giving their time in the after hours from their job where they actually make money. And in doing so, often we're giving our health to the project, because that's not balanced in the slightest. But on top of that, we put in the money to get our comics printed. So we're paying upfront for something that may or may not sell. And in order to sell it, we often have to sign up for like online services and pay for shipping. And then we have to pay for our travel to go to shows and pay for the table and make sure that we're there so that people know our comics exist and they can buy them. But the mounting costs of what we have to put in simply to provide this gorgeous art that touches people and changes their lives all across the world, that system doesn't work for us. And it certainly doesn't work if you're a person who has lower capacity due to health struggles, if you have lower financial capacity, also potentially due to health struggles or just difficult life situations, which occur all the time. I don't think making art, making comics should be something that you have to struggle and suffer to do, especially when it's such a great benefit to you and other people if it's done under the right conditions. So, yes, Hero Initiative. Also, yes, we need to talk about pay equity in comics. We need to talk about not asking creators to work for less than is a healthy fee for them to maintain a decent balance in their lives. We need to have conversations about this. It's way too silent out there. And actually, in both cases of health and finances, which are deeply intertwined, the less we talk about it, the more we are all suffering unnecessarily.
Okay, well, thanks for that feedback. That's great. Speaking of comic books, maybe we should talk a little bit about your comic book projects. Do you have anything on the go right now that you can talk about?
I do indeed. A couple of things that are in no way secrets, but they're probably going to take some time to emerge. I have a collaboration that I'm very excited about right now. I'm working with Dr. Abby Watson. She's a dancer in the UK, and her PhD thesis called Disordering Dance is all about how to create a thriving dance community, dance world, dance infrastructure, and dance practice when you are neurodivergent, and thus the way that you process information, the way that you exist in shared spaces. Sometimes, in an Abby's case, the way that you process information about how to move your body. Dyspraxia as a dancer is a really big challenge. So we're now adapting her PhD thesis into a choreographic memoir. And that is just like a really thrilling opportunity for me to learn more deeply about disability theory and movement. I'm actually exploring movement myself as a way to be connected to the work. And then I've got a personal project that is going to be a big kind of curveball to anyone who's been following my career. Because even though I'm still making graphic medicine, I'm still focusing on memoir, I'm still out here talking about health all the time, I'm also writing a 3-book series of werewolf horror fiction. So that one is really fun and slow, but I'm releasing a little bit on a blog on my website that people can support if they want to pay to help me sustain making this work, because it is taking a really long time, but it's so thrilling. I feel so in love with the project. There's at least those 2 things which are going to be emerging sometime in the next couple of years. And then I'm always doing little projects with folks, especially as collaborations. I really enjoy supporting other people's projects just in small comics that I can offer. So there's lots on the go.
Super. Good stuff. Now, I know it's somewhat earlier in the year, but do you have any events lined up this year where you'll be promoting your work?
Actually, so I myself am deeply neurodivergent. I've got a number of little diagnoses over here that have helped me to understand like what I need in life and how I function. Attending comics festivals is quite hard on me. So I don't have any specific plans for that until I have something really important to show up and promote. And when I do so, it's going to be with a lot of accommodations and care. So yeah, no events particularly. It's just, I teach my weekly class. I release my weekly podcast, and people can always stay in touch via my newsletter if they want to know exactly when I might be out in the wild.
And speaking of that, where can people find you online? Where do you recommend they go?
Yeah, I'm kind of flirting with the possibility of leaving social media. I am on Instagram, and my podcast is drawing health _ super easy to find. Then there's my website, where I would recommend people can sign up for the newsletter, because that's the one I'm really nurturing. I really want those more direct connections. If I send out a newsletter to you, you can always just hit reply and have a chat with me, which I really like. The wide world of Meta is less and less appealing, so I'm still not sure if that's going to be around much longer, but I would love to talk to people through my newsletter over email.
And what is that website they should go to find you?
Great question. How did I not say it in my answer? Yeah, they can go to georgiaweber.com, and that's where you'll find all things that I just spoke about.
Thanks to Georgia for the chat. You can discover more about Georgia Weber online at georgiaweber.com and at drawingtheinsideout.ca. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations with creators about making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.